At my husband's surprise party, his best friend said, "She doesn't belong here." So I opened the gift he hid. I spent 3 weeks planning my husband's 40th birthday party. 3 weeks of secret phone calls and whispered arrangements and careful lies about where I was going and what I was doing. 3 weeks of coordinating with caterers and decorators, of tracking down old friends he hadn't seen in years, of crafting the perfect guest list that would make him feel celebrated and loved and remembered. I wanted this night to be perfect because David deserved perfect, because after 12 years of marriage I still looked at him and felt grateful that somehow, impossibly, this brilliant and kind and remarkable man had chosen me. I wanted to give him a party that would reflect how much he meant to me, how much our life together meant, how proud I was to be his wife. I should have known that Marcus would find a way to ruin it. I should have anticipated that David's best friend since college, his business partner, the man who had been best man at our wedding despite my quiet reservations, would use this celebration as an opportunity to remind me, once again, that in his eyes I would never be good enough, would never truly belong in David's world, would always be the outsider who had somehow tricked her way into a life she didn't deserve. The party was at our house, the home David and I had bought 5 years ago in a neighborhood I'd never imagined I could afford to live in. It was a beautiful space, all hardwood floors and crown molding and windows that let in golden afternoon light, but I'd never quite shaken the feeling that I was playing house in someone else's life. I'd grown up in a trailer park in rural Ohio, raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep us fed and clothed and just barely above the poverty line. I'd put myself through community college and then state university on scholarships and student loans. Had worked as a waitress and a retail clerk and a dozen other minimum wage jobs to cover what the financial aid didn't. I'd met David when I was 26, working the front desk at the hotel where his company was hosting a conference, and somehow that chance encounter had led to coffee, then dinner, then a relationship that defied every expectation and assumption about who belonged with whom. David loved me. I never doubted that. He loved my work ethic and my sense of humor and the way I saw the world through eyes that hadn't been dulled by privilege and assumption. He loved that I'd fought for everything I had, that I understood the value of things because I'd known what it was like to have nothing. But Marcus had never accepted our relationship, had spent 12 years making subtle comments and not so subtle suggestions that I was with David for his money, that I was a gold digger who had gotten lucky, that eventually David would wake up and realize he'd married beneath him. The guests started arriving at 7, each one gasping with delight at the decorations I'd spent hours hanging, the photographs of David throughout his life that I'd arranged on every surface, the playlist I'd carefully curated of his favorite songs from every era. David's face when he walked in, when everyone shouted surprise and he stood there blinking in genuine shock, that face made every hour of planning worth it. He pulled me into a hug that lifted me off my feet, whispered in my ear that I was amazing, that he couldn't believe I'd done all this, that he loved me more than words could express. For the first 2 hours, everything was perfect. David moved through the crowd like he was floating, reconnecting with old friends and colleagues, laughing at stories and inside jokes I didn't always understand but loved watching him enjoy. I stayed mostly in the background, making sure drinks were refreshed and appetizers were circulating and everyone had what they needed. That was my role at these gatherings. The hostess who facilitated without drawing attention to herself. The wife who made things run smoothly so her husband could shine. I didn't mind. I'd never been comfortable at the center of attention anyway. Had always preferred to observe from the edges, to listen and learn and understand the dynamics of rooms I entered. Marcus arrived late, making an entrance as he always did. His girlfriend of the month draped on his arm like an expensive accessory. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than my car payment. His hair styled with product that caught the light. His smile wide and white and completely devoid of warmth when his eyes landed on me. He handed David an elaborately wrapped box, something large and clearly expensive, and I watched my husband's face light up with anticipation as Marcus said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "Wait until you see what I got you, man. Something actually worthy of this milestone. Something befitting who you are and what you've accomplished." The implication was clear, at least to me. Unlike the gift his wife gave him, the unspoken words hung in the air between us. I'd given David his present that morning, before he left for what he thought was a normal workday, before the surprise I'd been planning. It was a leather-bound journal, hand-crafted by a local artisan, with David's initials embossed on the cover. Inside the front cover, I'd written a letter, 12 pages of memories and gratitude and love, recounting our years together, the moments that had defined us, the life we'd built from nothing into something beautiful. It wasn't expensive, not in the way Marcus's gift would be, but it was personal and meaningful and made with the kind of attention that money couldn't buy. The party continued, the noise level rising as alcohol flowed and inhibitions lowered. I circulated through the rooms, checking on details, accepting compliments on the party with a kind of self-deprecating modesty that had become my default setting in social situations with David's friends. Most of them were kind to me, genuinely appreciative of the effort I'd put in, but I could always feel Marcus watching me with those calculating eyes, waiting for an opportunity, a misstep, something he could use to undermine me. That opportunity came around 9:30, when David was deep in conversation with a group of his college friends, reminiscing about their undergraduate years and the adventures I hadn't been part of. I was in the kitchen, arranging desserts on a serving platter, when I heard Marcus's voice behind me, loud and slightly slurred from the expensive whiskey he'd been drinking all evening. "You really outdid yourself, Jen," he said, and there was something in his tone that made my shoulders tense, made my hands still over the chocolate cake I'd been slicing. This whole party very impressive, very ambitious. I turned to face him, keeping my expression neutral, my voice polite. "Thank you, Marcus. I'm glad you're enjoying it." He leaned against the counter, too close, invading my space in a way that felt deliberately aggressive. "You know what I was just thinking," he continued, not waiting for me to respond. "I was thinking about how different David's life would have been if he'd married someone from his own world. Someone who understood his background, his education, his level." "Marcus," I said quietly, my heart starting to pound but my voice steady. "This isn't the time or place for this conversation. This is David's party. Can we please just—" "She doesn't belong here," Marcus said, louder now, and I realized with horror that the kitchen had fallen silent, that several guests had stopped their conversations to listen. "I've been saying it for 12 years, and tonight just proves it. Look at this party, Jen. It's nice, sure, but it's so pedestrian, so middle class. David deserves better than homemade decorations and grocery store cake. He deserves someone who can give him the kind of life his success has earned him." The words hit me like physical blows, each one finding the soft, vulnerable places where my insecurities lived, the doubts I'd never fully silenced about whether I was enough, whether I belonged, whether David had settled when he'd chosen me. I felt my face burning, felt tears threatening, and I hated myself for showing weakness, for letting Marcus see that his words had landed. But then I felt anger, hot and righteous and unfamiliar. I'd spent 12 years taking Marcus's subtle digs and veiled insults, had endured his condescension because I didn't want to make things difficult for David, didn't want to force my husband to choose between his wife and his oldest friend. But something about this moment, about being attacked in my own home during a party I'd poured my heart into, about having my worth questioned in front of guests I'd carefully selected and welcomed, something about all of it made me decide I was done being silent. "You're right, Marcus," I said, my voice cutting through the kitchen with a clarity that surprised me. "I don't belong in David's world. I didn't grow up with money or connections or the kind of privilege that makes people like you think you're inherently superior to people like me. I grew up poor, in a trailer that leaked when it rained, wearing second-hand clothes and eating government cheese and understanding from a very young age that the world wasn't fair and nobody was going to give me anything I didn't fight for." Marcus's smile faltered slightly, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. 12 years of swallowed words were pouring out of me like water from a broken dam. "But you know what else I am," I continued, stepping closer to him now, no longer willing to cede space or power. "I'm the person who sat with David in the hospital for 3 days when his father had his heart attack, holding his hand while you were in the Bahamas and couldn't be bothered to cut your vacation short. I'm the person who believed in him when he wanted to start his own company, who supported him through the lean years when you were pressuring him to play it safe and take the corporate job. I'm the person who knows he takes his coffee with too much sugar and has nightmares about disappointing his mother and cries during romantic comedies even though he pretends he doesn't. I'm the person who has built a life with him, not because of what he can give me, but because of who he is when nobody else is watching. The kitchen was completely silent now, and I could see David in the doorway, could see the expression on his face that I couldn't quite read. But I didn't stop. I was done stopping. So yes, Marcus, you're absolutely right. I don't belong in your world, and thank God for that, because your world is shallow and cruel and obsessed with all the wrong things. But I do belong in David's life, and I belong in this house, and I belong at this party I planned because I love my husband and wanted to celebrate him. And if you can't accept that after 12 years, then maybe you're the one who doesn't belong here. The silence stretched, taut and uncomfortable, until David moved into the kitchen, walked past Marcus without looking at him, and wrapped his arms around me. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry I didn't stop him sooner. I'm sorry I let him make you feel like you didn't belong. You belong everywhere I am, Jen. Always." Marcus made a dismissive sound, started to say something else, but David cut him off. "You need to leave," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. "You need to leave my house and my party and quite honestly my life. I've made excuses for you for years, told myself you'd eventually accept Jen, eventually see her the way I do. But I'm done. I'm done subjecting my wife to your toxic superiority and your complete inability to recognize value in anything that doesn't come with a price tag." "David, come on, man," Marcus said, his confidence finally cracking. "I've had too much to drink." "I didn't mean." "Yes, you did," David interrupted. "You meant every word. You've always meant it. And I've been too much of a coward to call you on it because you're my oldest friend and I didn't want to lose that connection. But you know what? That friendship isn't worth what it's costing me. It isn't worth my wife feeling uncomfortable in her own home. It isn't worth another second of my time." Marcus stared at David for a long moment, his face cycling through emotions I couldn't identify, before he finally grabbed his coat and stalked toward the door, his girlfriend scrambling to follow. The slam of the door echoed through the house, and then there was just the soft murmur of guests awkwardly returning to their conversations, pretending they hadn't witnessed the confrontation even though everyone clearly had. I was shaking, adrenaline and emotion flooding my system in waves that made me feel lightheaded. David held me tighter, and I could feel his heart racing against my chest, could feel him trembling too. "I should have done that years ago," he said. "I should have protected you from him. I'm so sorry." "It's okay," I said, though my voice was unsteady. "I'm okay." But David pulled back, looked at me with an intensity that made me catch my breath. "No," he said. "It's not okay. And I need to show you something. I need to show you what Marcus gave me, what he tried to hide from you." He led me through the house, guests parting to let us pass, until we reached the dining room where presents had been accumulating throughout the evening. Marcus's elaborately wrapped box sat on the table, larger than all the others, impossible to miss. David picked it up, and I noticed his hands were shaking as he tore through the expensive paper. Inside was a portfolio, leather-bound and professional, the kind of thing that cost hundreds of dollars from specialty stores. David opened it, and I saw legal documents, pages and pages of contracts and agreements and financial projections. At the top of the first page, in bold letters, was a title, Buyout Proposal DM Technologies. I didn't understand at first, couldn't process what I was seeing. But David's face had gone pale. His jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping. "He's been planning to force me out," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's been working with investors behind my back, putting together a package to buy out my share of the company we built together. He was going to present this to me tonight in front of all our friends, make it seem like a generous birthday gift, a way for me to cash out and enjoy my success. But really, he's been maneuvering to take full control of the company. He flipped through the pages, his hands moving faster now, anger replacing shock. He's been undervaluing my contributions, documenting every decision I've made that he disagreed with, building a case that I'm a liability to the company's future. And look at this, look at the valuation he's proposing. It's half of what my share is actually worth. He's trying to cheat me out of millions while making it look like he's doing me a favor. I felt sick, felt my earlier triumph at standing up to Marcus curdling into something darker and more complicated. This wasn't just about Marcus disapproving of me or looking down on my background. This was calculated, deliberate betrayal, years in the making. "There's more," David said, his voice hollow now. He'd found another section of the portfolio, this one filled with what looked like private investigator reports, photographs, surveillance logs. He's been having me followed. He's been documenting my schedule, my meetings, looking for, I don't even know what. Evidence that I'm not committed to the company. Proof that I'm somehow unsuitable to be a business partner. I took the portfolio from David's shaking hands, flipped through the pages myself, feeling anger building in my chest with every new revelation. And then I found the section about me, pages and pages about my background, my family, my financial history. Marcus had hired someone to investigate me, to dig up every detail about where I came from, to build a narrative that I was some kind of gold digger who had targeted David for his money. But as I read through the investigators' reports, I saw something Marcus had clearly overlooked, something he'd been too focused on finding dirt to notice. The investigator had been thorough, had documented not just my modest background but what I'd done with my life. The scholarships I'd earned. The perfect grades I'd maintained while working multiple jobs. The volunteer work I'd done throughout college, tutoring underprivileged kids in the same community where I'd grown up. The fact that I'd signed a prenuptial agreement without hesitation when David had insisted on one. Hadn't asked for anything except the right to keep my own career and my own identity. There was even a note from the investigator, buried in the appendix, that said, "Subject appears to have genuine affection for target. No evidence of financial motivation in relationship. Subject maintains separate bank account and continues working despite not needing income. Conclusion. Initial hypothesis not supported by evidence. Marcus had paid someone to prove I was a gold digger, and the investigator had come back with evidence of the opposite. But Marcus had included the report anyway, had twisted the facts and cherry-picked details to fit his narrative, had been planning to use this information to drive a wedge between David and me, to convince David that I was somehow holding him back or making him weak. I looked up from the portfolio to find David watching me, tears streaming down his face. "I can't believe I trusted him," he said. "I can't believe I let him into our lives, into our home. I can't believe I almost let him destroy everything we've built." "But you didn't," I said, taking his hands in mine. "You chose me, David. When it mattered, you chose us." The rest of the party passed in a blur. Guests left in small groups, most of them offering awkward congratulations and carefully worded expressions of support that didn't directly reference the scene they'd witnessed. Some of David's closer friends stayed behind, helped us clean up, asked if we needed anything. One of them, James, who'd been David's roommate in college and had always been kind to me, pulled me aside before he left. "I need to tell you something," he said, glancing toward where David was talking with another friend. "Marcus has been saying things about you for years. At guys' nights, at business dinners, whenever you weren't around. Small comments, little digs, suggestions that you weren't good enough, weren't sophisticated enough, weren't the right kind of wife for someone like David. Most of us ignored him, figured he was just being an ass, but we should have said something. We should have told David what was happening. I'm sorry we didn't. I thanked him, appreciated the apology even though it changed nothing about what had already happened. When everyone was finally gone, when the house was empty except for the two of us and the remnants of a party that had gone so catastrophically wrong, David and I sat on the couch in our living room, the portfolio open between us like evidence at a crime scene. I'm going to sue him, David said, his voice quiet but determined. For attempted fraud, for breach of fiduciary duty, for everything I can think of. He tried to steal my company, tried to destroy my marriage, and he did it all while pretending to be my friend. That kind of betrayal, there have to be consequences. What about the company? He asked. Can you run it without him? David laughed, a bitter sound that held no humor. The company would be better off without him. He's been riding on my work for years, taking credit for my innovations, my client relationships, my strategic vision. I built that company, Jen. I built it from nothing, and he came in as an investor and somehow convinced himself he was the real talent. I should have bought him out years ago. Over the next several months, we did exactly that. The lawsuit was ugly, public, everything we'd hoped to avoid. But David's lawyers were better than Marcus's, and more importantly, David's case was stronger. The evidence of Marcus's attempted fraud was overwhelming, documented in his own hand in that portfolio he'd been stupid enough to give as a gift. The judge ruled in David's favor, awarding him full ownership of the company and substantial damages for Marcus's breach of fiduciary duty. Marcus lost everything. His reputation in the business community, his investment in the company, his standing among the friends who'd once respected him. I should have felt triumphant, vindicated, but mostly I just felt sad. Sad that someone could be so consumed by jealousy and superiority that they'd destroy a decades-long friendship. Sad that Marcus had wasted so much time and energy hating me instead of building his own life. Sad that David had lost someone he'd considered a brother, even though that person had never really existed except in David's generous imagination. But something else happened during those months of legal battles and public drama. People started coming forward, other business associates and mutual friends who'd witnessed Marcus's behavior over the years, who'd heard his comments about me, who'd seen the way he tried to undermine David's confidence and isolate him from people who might support our marriage. It turned out we weren't the only ones who'd suffered from Marcus's toxic presence. There were others, people who'd been hurt by his manipulations, who'd lost opportunities because Marcus had spread lies or stolen credit for their work. A woman named Sarah contacted us through David's lawyer, told us that Marcus had sabotaged her career years ago when she dated David briefly before we met. Marcus had been threatened by their relationship, had worried that Sarah, who came from a wealthy family and had connections Marcus wanted access to, would supplant him as David's closest confidant. So he'd planted evidence suggesting Sarah was cheating on David, had manufactured a betrayal that led to their breakup. She'd never known why David had suddenly ended things, had carried that confusion for years, until news of our lawsuit made her realize what had really happened. There were others. A college friend Marcus had betrayed to win an internship. A business rival he'd destroyed through lies and manipulation. A pattern of behavior that stretched back decades, that showed Marcus wasn't just someone who'd made a mistake or let jealousy cloud his judgment. He was someone fundamentally broken, someone who measured his own worth by diminishing others, who couldn't tolerate anyone else's happiness if it made him feel less important. David took it hard, mourned the friendship he'd thought he had, grieved for the person he'd believed Marcus to be. But he also started to see our relationship differently, started to appreciate what we'd built in spite of Marcus's constant attempts to tear it down. One night, about 6 months after that disastrous party, he gave me another gift. It was small, wrapped in simple paper, Nothing like Marcus's elaborate presentation. Inside was a key, old and tarnished, and clearly not for any door in our current house. I looked at David questioningly, and he smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes for the first time in months. "It's the key to the first apartment we looked at together," he said. "Remember? Right after we got engaged, when we were trying to find a place we could afford on our combined salaries. You fell in love with that little studio with the brick walls and the terrible plumbing, and I fell in love with watching you fall in love with it. We didn't end up taking it because my dad offered to help with a down payment on a house instead, but I went back a few years ago and asked the landlord if I could have a key. I've been carrying it with me ever since, a reminder of who we were before the money and the business and all the complications. A reminder that the best version of myself is the one I am with you." I cried, actually sobbed, in a way I hadn't let myself do through all the legal battles and public scrutiny. Because this gift, this silly sentimental key to an apartment we'd never lived in, meant more than any expensive present Marcus could have bought. It meant David saw me, really saw me, understood what mattered to me and what I valued. It meant that after 12 years and all the challenges we'd faced, we still knew each other in the ways that counted. The company thrived after Marcus left. David promoted people who'd been overlooked, brought in new partners who valued collaboration over competition, built a culture that rewarded innovation and integrity instead of backstabbing and betrayal. The business grew faster than it ever had when Marcus was involved, proving what David had suspected all along. Marcus had been holding them back, had been more interested in protecting his own position than in building something truly great. I went back to school, finally pursuing the graduate degree I'd put off to support David's career. I'd always been interested in education policy, in finding ways to help kids from backgrounds like mine access the same opportunities available to wealthier students. David encouraged me, supported me, rearranged his schedule to accommodate my classes and study time. It felt like we were starting over, building a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine support instead of the unequal dynamic we'd fallen into over the years. We host parties now, gatherings of friends who actually care about us as people rather than as connections or status symbols. The guest lists are smaller, more intimate, filled with people who've proven they value our happiness over their own advancement. Sometimes I think about that 40th birthday party, about Marcus's cruel words and the portfolio that revealed his betrayal. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if he'd never given David that gift, if we'd continued in ignorance while he maneuvered behind our backs. But mostly I'm grateful. Grateful that the truth came out when it did, before Marcus could do irreparable damage. Grateful that David chose to defend me, to believe in us, to walk away from a friendship that was poisoning his life. Grateful that I finally found the courage to speak up, to claim my place in David's world instead of constantly apologizing for occupying space I'd earned through love and commitment and 12 years of showing up. Marcus was right about one thing. I don't belong in his world, in the world of people who measure worth by bank accounts and pedigrees and the ability to exclude and diminish others. But I do belong in this life I've built with David, in this marriage that has survived betrayal and doubt and the constant pressure to conform to someone else's vision of what we should be. The gift Marcus tried to hide revealed more than his betrayal. It revealed the strength of what David and I had built together, the foundation that couldn't be shaken by lies or manipulation or elaborate schemes. It revealed that the person who didn't belong wasn't me. It was the one who'd spent 12 years trying to convince us otherwise. And that, more than any legal victory or business success, more than any expensive present or elaborate party, that knowledge is the real gift. The understanding that belonging isn't about where you come from or how much money you have or whether you fit someone else's idea of appropriate. It's about who you choose to be, who chooses you in return, and whether you have the courage to defend that choice when it's challenged. Chose David. He chose me. And we chose to build a life together that has nothing to do with Marcus's narrow, bitter vision of what we should be. That's not just belonging. That's home.